Legal, regulatable, taxable? Those are the questions when it comes to fantasy sports websites like FanDuel and Boston-based DraftKings. Both let you create your own team from real players, then bet money and maybe even win some. This week, New York determined both amount to illegal gambling. Nevada said the same a few weeks back. So what's the deal here in Massachusetts? Attorney General Maura Healey's office says there is no statute that explicitly deals with daily fantasy sports, meaning it's not illegal in our state, but that there is little question this industry will need to be regulated in order to protect consumers. The State Gaming Commission has been looking into these issues as well. And when I asked Chairman Steve Crosby what he was thinking 2 weeks ago, here's what he had to say.
I tend to be somebody who leans away from regulation. The question is, are the same factors at play that make us regulate casinos in this business? Are there similarities? I don't know.
Today with us on Boston Public Radio, the governor broke the tie.
It's a new enterprise. It's a new business. It's a new way of engaging people in these games of skill. And I think it's important when you have one of those to make sure you have the right kinds of consumer protections in place to be sure people are playing on a level playing field. But if the AG comes back and says, here's the 4 or 5 things we need to do as a Commonwealth to ensure that people who participate in these are appropriately protected and the playing field is level and no one has more knowledge than anybody else, those are things I would support doing.
Joining me now to talk more about it all is Shirley Leung. Shirley's a business columnist at the Boston Globe and a wildly successful first-time player just a couple of weeks ago. Dan Primack is a senior editor at Fortune and has dabbled in it a little bit himself. Good to see you both. Can you explain in 30 seconds or less what it is for those at home who don't get it?
Me?
You, yes, go ahead.
Well, you go online and you can wager, you can place money, and you pick 9 players from teams. Let's say the NFL, from various teams.
They cost different amounts.
And it's and you try to come up with a team, and you can't just put all superstars in it because you have a cap.
You can't afford it, right?
Right, you have like $50,000 to work with, fictional money, and the goal is, can you find those kind of stars, those.
Whose individual statistics for an individual. Is that accurate? Is that pretty
That's
close?
accurate. It's not just football. They do it for
Right,
basketball and baseball and every sport.
Right.
Okay, let's start with the legality issue a minute ago. Virtually every leader in Massachusetts says it's legal, but Joan Vanocchi, your colleague, this afternoon quotes an interview with Maura Healey in which she says she could use an old statute, Massachusetts statute, to shut it down, but she isn't. Why isn't she?
I think because, well, let's start with the fact that DraftKings, as you said, is based here in Boston. It's probably the most successful or most promising tech startup in the state in quite some time. That matters. That's important. The other thing is there's a lot of people playing it. Fantasy sports has been around really since the 1970s and became a lot bigger maybe 10 years ago with the web. There's hundreds of thousands of people playing this. There is a political piece of this.
So the other political piece, Joan writes this afternoon, she just did a thing about domestic violence with Robert Kraft, who's involved, the owner of the Patriots. She goes on to say Martha Coakley, her predecessor and mentor, obviously is representing DraftKings. Is it all political?
No, I think Maura has it right here. I agree with her. She is arguing that you cannot apply an old statute to a new technology, to a new company. You need to create, you need to look at the law, perhaps create new laws, new regulations. I think the New York AG got it wrong.
Why?
He is saying, he just looked at, he only spent 5 weeks looking at this, and these daily fantasy sports sites have been around for years.
So why did he do it then?
And he just looks at it, he said, I'm looking at the law suddenly, and I think it violates New York law. But what he should have done is said, all right, you guys, he needs to uphold the laws in New York. What he could have done, he could have said, you guys are in violation of the law. Let's work together to get you on the right side of the law.
You're
what can
a
you
uniter,
do?
not a divider.
Exactly.
But this whole thing you mentioned about what the Attorney General said, I just read this in the Boston Magazine story by Garrett Quinn. She's saying, I'm not going to use a really old statute when this kind of industry was never envisioned. This kind of industry was never envisioned when the federal statute was passed. They had no idea this was going to happen.
It wasn't, and it's important to note, New York has a particularly stringent law. The rule that Schneiderman is using, the AG in New York, they have a much different level than Nevada. The real thing about this comes down to this, federally, is this skill versus luck. And what the companies, what DraftKings and FanDuel will argue is, if you look at their data, the people who win tend to win. The people who lose tend to lose. And they'll argue that that's...
Which buttresses the argument
they'll say
that
that's skill as opposed
thing.
to luck. In roulette, you win or you lose. It's random.
Okay, so the issue, despite what Steve Crosby said to me a week or so ago, the chair of the Gaming Commission, he may have even moved since then. I don't know. The issue is about regulation, how much they're going to regulate. He wrote a piece. I didn't realize how big this thing was. $100 million in advertising in 1 week.
Right.
The first week of the NFL, even though they're not making a profit.
They're not making profit.
So
no.
if it turns out there's some politics and whatever you said a minute ago, so what's she going to do on this thing? She says she's going to regulate it, protect the consumer, toughest consumer protection in the country. What's that translate to?
There's a lot of things she can do. You know, when I looked at DraftKings, look at their ads. I think their ads are deceptive marketing. I think there needs to be more truth in advertising. She actually has tools to deal with that, and I think.
What do you mean? Like the guy holds up the check and says I want 100 grand, doesn't mention he lost 300 grand? Is that what you mean?
Exactly. I mean, it makes it sound like if you play, you're automatically a winner. It also, the advertising makes it seem like anybody who's a sports fan can win, when in fact it's a game of they can. But when in fact it's a game of skill. You need to know more than just sports to win.
But you, based on your notion about the politics of this thing, is DraftKings here, this great disruptor that's huge in Massachusetts. Does this sound like one of these kinds of situations where the disruptor drafts the regulations to cover the disruptor?
I think that, well, they would certainly like to. And they've been advocating, both companies have been going to states and saying, yes, regulate us, let's work with you, let's regulate us. I think so. And again, the players are a big deal. DraftKings tomorrow morning, they just announced before we came out here, is going to have a rally in New York City with its users, with its players.
A rally?
They want to rally with their users. They sent out an email today. We'll see how many show up at 8 a.m. tomorrow at Schneiderman's office.
Okay, the one thing that's beyond dispute is, as big as this is here in Massachusetts, it's obviously taking some business, draining some business away from gambling entities that pay a tax or pay something to the state, casinos, lotteries, etc. Why shouldn't the thing be taxed? Regulate and tax.
I don't think the companies are saying don't tax me. I think they would agree to some form of tax. I think they wouldn't. They don't. I think they would disagree that they should be taxed at the same rate as casinos,
which is 25%.
Yeah,
of
they're
revenues,
very established. They're very established.
Why shouldn't they be taxed at a higher rate? They don't have brick and mortar. A casino's got to build a
because
building.
Because the house doesn't win, right? Most games when you play at a casino, you're playing against the house, even particularly a sportsbook, right? You're playing against the spread, so the house. In this, they're playing purely on volume, right? They're going to take a cut of every game, but DraftKings never beats you. FanDuel never beats you. You play against other people.
And also, there's guaranteed payouts almost every game. If they'll say we will pay this money out, no matter how many people play.
When you say that there's guaranteed, we have absolutely no idea, though, how much of a pot that's coming out of. Do we? I mean, you've been analyzing some of these financials.
I mean, we don't. I mean, they could. Could easily be part of regulation. There could easily be oversight of that. There could be either independent auditors, et cetera. That's easy to do.
Right.
And
I mean, when
be
you play, they'll tell you how many people played that game, and they'll, if it's 5,000 players or 10,000 players, so you know, and you can actually do the math to figure out how much money they, what their margin is.
So one last quick thing. Deb Goldberg, the treasurer, is talking about putting together a competing kind of fantasy sports betting thing within the lottery. You're frowning. Are you frowning?
I'm frowning because I don't think anyone's going to play it.
I mean, if it's in the lottery.
Yeah, and not because it's going to be part of the lottery, but if FanDuel and DraftKings are still legal. If they're illegal, then I guess people play. But if they're still legal and you want to play for the $5-10 million pot, you'd rather play against the whole world than against people in Massachusetts. The pot's going to be small.
You agree? 10 seconds.
Well, I think with the bigger story about lottery and daily fantasy sports is not just the lottery getting into that, but also it opens a door for online gaming in general for the lottery going online. That is a bigger deal.
Shirley Young, it's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Pleasure. It's been a long time.
Thank you.
Great to see you as well.